All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm glad you could be here this afternoon. My name is Melissa Weathers, for those of you that don't know me. I'm an ML teacher in Fair Lawn, New Jersey at a K through 4 elementary school. I'm also the chairperson this year for the Bergen chapter of NJTESOL-NJBE, and happy to be here. And I wanted to remind everyone towards the end of the presentation, the link for the certificate will be in the chat. So please click on that, answer a couple questions, submit it, and you should receive your PD in your personal email. So without any more time, I'm very happy to welcome Maggie Churchill, who's here to present some really good information on the WIDA standards framework. So Maggie, floor is yours, and thank you very much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Bergen chapter is my home chapter. So it's always nice to come back home again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and you will also see, I'm actually going to ask Melissa if she can kind of copy and post that link in the chat box as well, to the
Copy
slide
the
deck.
link.
So people will
Oh,
have access to that as well.
okay.
And the session's also going to be recorded. So it is something that was created for our chapters and for our colleagues. So this is, available. You can share this information with others. It's not information that I own. So feel free to kind of share that and move that forward. So today we're going to talk about using the WIDA standards framework to teach multilingual learners. I'm just kind of curious, and maybe this is something that people can share in the chat box. If you've actually started using this in your district, I would love to hear about that. Do you have a curriculum that is currently aligned to it? So that's actually also something that's new and it's required. I'm going to go over what some of those new requirements are from NJDOE. Just to kind of share as well, I'm, an open book. My district has not yet done a curriculum that is aligned to the standards framework. So supposed to happen this year. I haven't heard anything about that. So, hanging out, waiting. So just so you know, I'm kind of in the same boat and, I would just love to hear. So drop, just some information on the chat. Is your district currently using this? Do they have a curriculum aligned to it? Is it something that they're working on? I would just love to get some feedback. Okay.
All right, I just posted the link to the slides.
Awesome. And then if you also want to share in the chat, just who's here today, where are you coming from, district that you teach in, what grade level that you teach. And if there is something specific that you would like some guidance on, feel free to mention that in the chat as well. And I'm going to ask if Melissa could just monitor the chat. It's okay to interrupt me with questions. I'd rather deal with it at the time than go back later at the end.
Sure.
So that's okay. So you can always put that in the chat and we can kind of monitor that as well. Okay, so we are going to be talking about our responsibilities and new mandates around teaching multilingual learners in New Jersey, developing the can-do philosophy, talking about academic language and content and how it is showcased throughout the WIDA standards framework and ways that we can incorporate that into our units and lessons that we use. So here's our first slide. So wherever you see a link, that kind of is that blue color, that's a link. And so this is actually a link to the updated NJDOE webpage. If anyone's gone there recently, it really has changed a lot. So it is hard to find a lot of information. So what I've done is actually highlighted the big takeaways from what's there on the new website, but it is linked here as well. So what's new is highlighted, and this is actually a slide you can also feel free to share with colleagues, administrators, because oftentimes I'm finding, particularly administrators, they are not aware of these changes. So this is new information for them as well. So I've actually already presented this to my staff, my district staff in both buildings where I teach. And so people have been informed, but it's really just only at the very beginning stages. So most importantly, it's now expressly stated in the code that all teachers, district leaders share that responsibility for the outcomes of multilingual learners. So that means that we now have that stated. They're no longer just our students, they are everyone's students, not that they ever were, but there's often that perception. And so it explicitly states as well that language instruction has to be integrated into content learning based on academic standards. So the WIDA standards framework is aligned to the content standards. They are integrated standards. So that's actually what's really important to note is that, and the standards look familiar to content teachers because they are content standards. So they're going to be very familiar with the language of it. So these are integrated standards. It also says that teachers must differentiate their instruction and their classroom assessment. So not just what and how we teach, but also what and how we assess. And they need to do that in guidance with the standards framework. And so, of course, scaffolding is going to be necessary. And again, this is all stated on the website. So the link is there at the very top. That we should be using the WIDA Standard Framework 2020 edition, that we're using multiple data indicators, that both standards need to be present in teachers' lesson plans. So by both standards, we mean the WIDA 2020 ELD standards and the content standards. So I've actually been going around in the last month to my team department meetings and presenting and showing them how to put these standards into their lesson plans. We use real time as a student information system in our district. And so real time actually already has, well, your district has to request it, but real time actually has the WIDA 2020 standards there. And I've actually been showing teachers how to do that. So it does say that ML teachers, which means all teachers who teach MLs. It doesn't mean ESL teachers. It means all ML teachers, all of us need to base their lessons on those both types of standards, and they should include that in their lesson plans, which should also include a language objective as well as a content objective. So I've been showing that as well to team levels, grade level teams of teachers. And then finally, your ESL curriculum must be written and based on the 2020 WIDA ELD standards framework. So feel free to pay that forward, share that, put it on a billboard, however you want to disseminate that information. Okay. So just if you would share in the chat, I'm just kind of curious, where do you see joint responsibility happening in your district? So is this happening in your district? And if not, how, or maybe how can you bring it forward? So if you don't see it happening, how can you bring this information forward to others in the district? So I'm going to ask if you could drop an idea in the chat, right? So not just listening to what we're presenting today, but actually taking action and bringing this forward. So how can you actually take a step to make this happen? So if you could drop that into the chat. And that's something we can share with each other. A lot of times it begins with us taking that step, and oftentimes it is at the, I guess, obligation of the ESL or bilingual teacher to kind of start that conversation, because a lot of times the conversation doesn't start without us. And we do need to take that step to empower others, and to also help bring to the forefront the needs of our students. So a lot of times it takes us taking that step, making the initiative to have that conversation, even if it's like, okay, hey, can we start to have these conversations? I want to go around and talk to grade level teams. I want to talk to administrators. I've done all kinds of things. I can't say that they've all happened. I've tried. I find that things, when I work smaller and I work closer with teachers, particularly in teams, that it has a better outcome. And so that's what I've been trying to do this year. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. Okay. And so this is also another great slide to share with colleagues. As I mentioned, I don't own any of this information. This slide in particular is taken from WIDA. I like how it's set up, but it really does focus on the asset-based perspective for multilingual learners, which is also a requirement in the code as well. That we need to develop the can-do philosophies that our colleagues see our students as contributors to their classroom environments, because they already bring so much, right? They have linguistic knowledge. They already have knowledge of multiple languages and how they work, which is why they're called MLs. They have cultural observances that are unique, and they add to the conversation around practices and beliefs and ways of thinking that may be different from what other students have experienced. So it's always enlightening, and it's always fascinating and interesting to kind of learn those things, and students can share those practices that they have. Their experiential knowledge. So they have already had a very varied experience in their lives, whether it was through education or other experiences, family experiences, life experiences, experiences in their country. Students have so much to share and to offer, and many times they haven't been asked. So getting them to share these stories, and kind of keep track and be intentional about, okay, so what what information do I gain from this, and how can I incorporate that in my lessons, in my units as well? And also the fact that they have, varied social and emotional relationships. They typically have a wider range of relationships with older adults, or more adults than maybe their typical peers might. And so they already have this knowledge that they come with, right? These are already things that they can do. These are the assets that they bring to our schools and our communities. And we want to highlight that, not just in our classrooms, but also in our lessons and in our unit plans. Because when we teach from a culturally responsive and linguistically responsive perspective, we really highlight the assets that they bring, and we lean on them in the moments when we're teaching to really help leverage that with the entire class. So, again, this is another way to kind of showcase our students and present um, multilingual learners really truly as the assets that they are. So again, it's another tool. Feel free again to kind of use these slides. If you have to present or talk with colleagues, this is a great one to use. Okay. So now we're going to get into the framework. Just want to invite you, if you have not yet already done so, depending on the grade levels that you teach, and I just want to go over what these are quickly. I'm not going to click on them, but you might want the full framework, which is the digital version. It's all 400 pages. If you teach multiple, like if you're a K-5 teacher or a K-8 teacher, God bless you, you're going to need that full framework. But what's also maybe easier to start with are the grade level cluster editions. So those are really great because they're divided by those grade level clusters that we know. So there's just kinder, right? There's just 6 to 8. There's just 2 to 3. So you can click and just start with your cluster edition. If you're already assigned at a grade level and you teach only on the grade level, that's great. And so it's good to kind of see the difference. And it's nice to kind of just start small with a grade cluster edition. Some of these I've shared with my teachers, 6 to 8, so it's nice to just give them that. And I've also shown them, like the socialized teacher, okay, I want you to just look at these pages on the language for social studies or the language for mathematics. The standard satchel is the digital version, the digital lookup of the actual standards. So this is something else that's new and different in our lesson plans, that we now actually have to put the codes. So just like you have to put the codes for your NJ SLS standards, you also need to put the WIDA codes. And there's numbers. There's numbers and there's letters, just like they look like standards codes, right? So the standard satchel is a lookup. It actually works like Pinterest. So you can look something up and you can pin it to the board, and then it saves it, and you can copy it and paste it in your lesson plan. You do not need to look up and type these codes. No one should be doing that, because this standard satchel will do it for you. What's nice is that WIDA has also just launched the Spanish one for the Spanish language development standards, which are called Marco Dale. So we now have 2 digital lookups for the ELD standards and the SLD standards. So not only, grab this, but bookmark it as well. And then the WIDA implementation guide is for district level planning, for administrators, for collaborators to kind of see, okay, if we're taking that next step, if your district is doing, guided implementation, if we're looking to develop units, if you're co-teaching with someone, this is a WIDA published guide. It's a little bit more at the theoretical level, so not necessarily practical. But you will see some upcoming examples in the spring version of NJTESOL-NJBE Voices, which is actually going to have some sample units of what this could look like. So that'll be coming out too. Look for that. Okay. So I just want to share, this is actually what real time, if anybody has real time, just kind of show of your virtual hands. Let's see your virtual hands. Show your virtual hand. Do you have real time in your district as your student management system? If you have real time, this is actually what the standard satchel looks like once it's put into real time. So my district already did this, but if you don't have a way to look up your WIDA standards in your lesson plan, however you submit your lesson plans in your district, everyone needs to have access to these standards. So it's not just for you, it's also for all of the teachers. The math teacher needs this. The science teacher needs this. The social studies teacher needs this. So you need to get the WIDA standards framework into the lesson plan interface so that all teachers have access. And this is actually what it looks like. So you kind of click and you open and you open and you open. It's like a little Russian doll system. And I click them all as favorites. And then when you select the box, it drops it into my lesson plan and I can save that. So I've been showing teachers which ones to choose and how to do that. And so just so you know, real time has it. And if you have other ones like Genesis, they also have it as well. You just need to talk to your administrator to make sure it's in there. You need it, and so does everyone else. Okay. Does anybody, I'm just kind of curious, anybody have that? Or can you tell me, Melissa, from the chat, is there anybody who's using it in their lesson plans currently through a lookup? I am.
I know we use real time. I use that with the CST team though, really for their information. I don't know Gina or Michelle. I don't know if you at your level are using any of this. I'm not really sure, but I know for me, I'm really using it with the CST team, not this way.
Yeah,
I'm very excited
same.
about this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually want to inquire because we have real time.
Yeah,
Yep.
And we have Genesis. I just saw what Emma wrote.
yes, that's
I'm
right.
curious if we have to upload it or it's already preloaded. I'd have to ask because I
So
have not seen that.
real time already has it. What has to happen is your district administrator has to request it, but it
Okay.
already exists. This is it. It exists.
Right. Okay. We'll have to ask
So,
about that
yeah,
then.
bring
Yes.
that conversation forward. That is a question I'm going to be
Yeah.
asking you at the end of today. So what are some things you can bring forward to district? This definitely needs to be one of them. I would make it a top priority.
Yeah, because Genesis has some information, but this is much more
Yeah,
aligned
it
with
is.
WIDA.
What's a little, and I do show it to teachers because it is like this. You have to click and open and click and open. So it's like that Russian doll folder inside of a folder inside of a folder thing. But it does get there. And I've been going around and showing grade level teams what that looks like. And I've been giving them advice on which ones to choose. Okay.
All right, great.
Okay, so again, here's that kind of nesting organization that gives us an overview of what the standards framework looks like. So these are the kind of components or pieces of the framework. So of course, it's organized by those grade level clusters, the WIDA grade level clusters that we're familiar with. And that's where I would recommend starting is like maybe with, even if you teach multiple grade level clusters and you're feeling overwhelmed, just start with one of them, right? Start with the one where you're maybe more comfortable or you have the most students. It's totally fine. Right? Our standards are still the same: social instructional, language arts, math, science, social studies. What I've shared with teachers is that everyone is using standard 1, social instructional, in every lesson. So social instructional includes things like giving directions, when students have paired conversations or partner conversations with each other, when they have to seek or ask information, and even in some grade levels, it's actually where you summarize or you give information. It also, interesting enough, includes STEM instruction. So I only found that out last year, but if you teach STEM or you're in a science classroom and they're doing STEM lessons, that actually falls under social instructional because it's all discussion conversation based where students have to talk about how to optimize solutions. That's discussion, and that falls under social instructional. Okay, so then we're going to briefly go over these today. So key language uses are narrate, inform, argue, and explain. You will actually see as you go through the framework where they are most prevalent. So they're not there listed for every grade level for every standard because they're not necessarily prevalent in every key language use. So you're going to see ones that are listed there strategically. Okay. It doesn't mean that you can't have one in the other, but you're not going to see narrate under math because it so rarely happens that it's not a standard that we assess at math, if that makes sense. We're going to talk about language expectations. So that is actually the language kind of stem and the function together. The language stem and the language function with the features is what gives you the language expectation. So these sort of look and sound a lot like lesson objectives. And that's what's really great is that that's how I use them in my lesson plans because they really do read exactly like that. The proficiency level descriptors are to determine where that student is. And again, it's those proficiency levels that we're familiar with, 1 through 6. They're pretty lengthy and very involved. And I am happy to report that WIDA is actually coming out with a new tool that's going to be a lot more user-friendly than using the proficiency level descriptors. It's something I've actually been piloting this year, and it's soon to be released in the spring. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. Okay. So again, as we've said, the 5 standards have not changed. They're still the same. The difference is that standard 1 is now threaded throughout all content areas, which is why I've also been asking teachers to make sure that it's always in every lesson every day. If students are speaking to each other, if they're doing a turn and talk, if you're giving directions, if they're listening to instructions, you're doing standard 1. So that lives everywhere. And so I'm really happy to see that. And that kind of also helps connect between the two, between all the other content level, the content areas as well. So just a little bit on the examples of the key language uses. So key language uses are how I basically use, this is sort of my method of attack when I'm planning units, is that I look for, okay, what are our primary key language uses that we want to address in this unit? And it's going to be one of the four, or it could even be more than one. Narrate, inform, explain, and argue. So these are just examples of the kinds of things that we ask kids to do. When we narrate, we ask them to tell a story. We might ask them to write an autobiography, or to write a story about a time in their life. Right? This is often asked of students. They're very familiar with this. Inform, we all ask students to write a report. They often have to conduct research, any kind of report. If it's an animal report, if it's a report about a state or a report about a country, right? So any kind of report is inform. Anytime they're asked to summarize or give the main idea from reading, that's inform, right? They're giving a presentation. We're very familiar with narrate, inform, right? So they live in every class. We especially see them in language arts, particularly traditionally in ESL type teaching. And then when we get down to explain and argue, these key languages typically live in science, social studies, and math, because explanation has to do with a phenomena, or how you evaluate a model in a science class, or in math, it would be a way to describe a solution and the steps you took to solve it. Or in social studies, it could be how or why something works, like a process, like how a bill becomes a law. Okay, and then argue, also you're going to see most prevalently in science and social studies, also in language arts. We're very familiar with claims and evidence and reasoning, about debating a topic or giving a critique, or choices of how to solve a problem as to which way is the best way to solve this problem. That's also a mathematical argument. So, if you could drop in the chat, what is a place where you already teach one of these key language uses? And maybe it's even in a unit you're currently teaching. What am I doing right now? We're doing a unit on myths. And so there is narration, right? But students also have had to do some explanation in this unit for me, because even though there's myth, we actually looked at the scientific explanation. It has to do with the sun, behind how the sun powers the earth. So we read two myths about it, but then we also looked at the scientific explanation. And they actually had to write a scientific explanation for me. So we did a little work on how that actually happens scientifically. They had to explain a picture, they had to watch a video, we used vocabulary, they had to talk about it with their partner, and then they actually had to write a scientific explanation, very similar to the kind of task they're going to be asked to do on the access test. And I find that this is a really good way to start the conversation with grade level teachers or your content area teachers. When you recognize with them that there are places where you are already doing this, and this has been my message, because I don't want it to appear like another burden, right? Teachers they're very overburdened. We know this. And people right now feel like it's one more thing that's being put on their plate. And I'm very quick to remind them, you are already doing this. So this really isn't anything new. We're kind of capturing a lot of it, and being really explicit about it. So getting them to realize, where do I already do this? I already do a lot of this. So hopefully that's also a helpful way to kind of start that conversation with your grade level teachers. So this image from WIDA just kind of shows the structure of that framework again. We talked about statements, standard statements, key language uses, the language expectations, and that's where they start to look like standards over here with these letters and numbers, right? And then those PLDs. Okay, so that's kind of the structure of the framework. That's what the framework actually looks like. And as I mentioned, the PLDs, just a kind of quick word again about that, just to give you in a nutshell what they are, because I feel that what's there in the framework is very overwhelming. And as someone who's been looking at it for 8 years, for me to say I'm overwhelmed by it, I can feel pretty confident in saying that I speak for most people, but we are definitely overwhelmed by that, and it's not a helpful tool. So just to get the gist of what you look for when you assess student work, you assess it based on those dimensions of academic language. We're looking at 3 things. So we're looking at the discourse structure. We're looking at the organization. How well did they organize their response? Is it cohesive? How dense is it? Are they not just talking about something, but are they going deep and diving deep? They're being really specific. We're looking at the sentence level. So what kind of sentences are they constructing? Do you have phrases? Do you have simple sentences, compound, complex? The ultimate is to have a variety of them. And then the word phrase level, are they using the key vocabulary? If I'm talking about that scientific explanation that they had to do for me, we talked about how the sun powers the earth. So they had to use words like transmits, energy, thermal, heat, right? So these are requirements. If you're going to talk about how the sun heats the earth, I need to see those words and phrases in your response. Those are the 3 look fors. And as I mentioned, WIDA is going to be releasing a tool coming out in the spring that's going to be a lot more helpful than what's there currently. So hang on, it's coming, just to let you know. Okay, this is that kind of quick in a nutshell what I basically said. When you are assessing students' work, right? Because all teachers teach academic language. So this is a tool that all teachers can use. This is not just for us. The science teacher can use this to actually look and see, okay, so how much language are they producing? Like, is there enough? Did they follow the expected structure? So an explanation has a very explicit structure that students need to follow. And so the organization is clear, the cohesion of ideas, they go together, right? So one might lead to the next, especially an explanation, because you typically have either a cycle or you have a process where there's a certain flow, there's something that starts and it kind of goes through this process. Again, at that sentence level, the key word is variety. These are actually the ones that score higher on WIDA assessments when they have a variety of sentence types, not just one, but a variety. And then finally, that word phrase level, again, we're looking for the variety of phrases. We're looking for vocabulary words. We're also looking for sequence words. So if they're giving an explanation or if they're telling me how something happens and they're using first, next, then finally, I'm looking for those sequence words because it actually does help ideas flow from one into the next. And so this is how you will assess expressive language, spoken or written. Okay, so back to the framework. Within the framework, we're talking about the components, the pieces of the framework. What's really nice about this image, and it comes from the big 400-page book. I like this image of the funnel because it actually shows you your lesson progression. So when I write my lessons, right, as most people do, I kind of begin with those standards, right? So what are the requirements, the standard requirements? I'm going to have social instructional language, and maybe I'm doing language for science because I'm doing that explanation with the sun, right? So they're going to have to explain, right? So I have language for science. My students are going to explain. They're going to interpret and construct. So interpret is that receptive language. They're going to listen. They're going to watch a video. They're going to look at an image. This is all interpretive. They're going to make sense of it, right? And then ultimately they will have to construct their own scientific explanation that answers that question. How does the sun power the earth? And so they're going to need to give some evidence, right? They are going to need to go through some steps. What happens first? They're going to need some vocabulary to help them. And they're going to need to explain that phenomena. So this is the kind of tricky part for a lot of students, is talking about, okay, so how does the sun actually get to the earth? Like, does it just jump there? Does it get in a car and drive? Right. So I ask these questions and students are like, no. And I, actually talk to them about, when you draw a picture and you always put the sun in the corner and it has the little lines. What are the little lines, right? So they know what the little lines are because they've always drawn this. And we actually start talking about, okay, that's how that phenomenon is actually happening, right? So it's transmitted through rays, radiation, right? So it's radiating heat. We talk about that. This is that phenomenon. So they start with that. Then they go through the process of explaining what happens first. How do we receive the light from the sun? What does it do first in the process? We typically use a picture. And then when I look at their actual construction, when they have to pull it together, there are these language features that they need to help them use language in order to give that explanation. And you will see those specifically listed on your grade level cluster pages as you go through the framework. So in each language specific content area language at each grade level, these language features actually differ and they become a little bit, they expand in each grade level cluster as you go up in grade level clusters. And that's really this next piece. So within each grade level cluster, within each key language use, you have those language expectations. They look and sound like lesson objectives. I use them like that in my lesson plans. I don't change them. Okay, so that's how I know I'm linked directly. I'm using them as lesson objectives. The language functions relate to that key language use, right? That kind of helps frame the lesson. Remember, I talked about doing an explanation. So how do we make that happen? How does that function to make meaning? How can I show that? What does it look and sound like? And then the language features are those bits and pieces of language that I need to actually help me construct it. And in my lesson plans, I explicitly teach this. So I do this by showing them, modeling. We look at a sample. We actually practice ways to construct sentences. I actually might do a mini lesson if it's a narration, it's going to be past tense. So I might do a little mini lesson on how to form the past tense of verbs so that students know how to do this in their writing. So that's actually where I'm incorporating the grammar, is through the language feature that's in the framework that I need to focus on. It actually tells you. So if you go to your grade level and you're doing language for science and it's an explanation, it's actually going to tell you, okay, so maybe in middle school you want to use passive language, passive construction, how something is formed, or so you'll see that in scientific language. And so it's really specific. It's actually going to tell you what to focus on. Here is a snippet of not all of them, but like the big ones, the big pieces of language expectations that comes from the framework. So what we did here was we took the language expectations that we expect kindergartners to do. And you'll see they kind of look and sound like, as I said, those lesson objectives and those goals. And they come from the standards. These come from language arts standards. These come from science standards because, again, these standards are integrated with content standards. So in kindergarten, they have to do all of these things. They have to share observations. They have to ask questions. They have to recount ideas. They have to define what concepts, say what something is, right? What is the sun? All right, that's defining a concept. And they have to support opinion. So this is basically the kind of big things that we ask kids to do in kindergarten. And then as you move up from K to 1, you're actually adding on. So you're not just doing the green in first grade, you're actually doing what's here and everything below it. So each grade level cluster becomes an add-on. So grade 2 to 3, you're doing everything that's purple and what's below, right? So by the time you get up into high school, you're basically responsible for everything that you see here. What I'm showing you is the distinction. So that's where in high school, the differentiation is you have to paraphrase the central idea, or you have to refute a claim. So that's where it's new. That's what's new and different at that grade level cluster. But we still have to make sure that students can do all of these things underneath. And you will see it in the framework. It just isn't spelled out this way. So this is just a way to kind of make that clear. And it should look and, again, sound familiar because kids have to add details when they're talking about something, right? This is something that's already known to them. Language arts teachers are going to be very familiar with this. Okay, so the language functions, it's really the way that you address discourse structure in your teaching. So in my class, I do a lot of scientific topics. I always kind of link a science, either article or information, to my existing units to kind of help them get that real explicit practice of explanation. Because I'm going to actually take them through what it looks and sounds like so they can give a written or an oral explanation. And so what I've done is I've created anchor charts that explain the structure, and I teach it very explicitly to students. We use this when we're drafting or before we're speaking. This is an anchor chart for explanation at the middle school levels. This is grades 6 to 8. And you'll see the highlighted phrases here. So what I've done is I've taken the highlighted phrases from the framework where it says language function for middle school for 6 to 8 under language for science explain. And if you look there, the language functions are orient the audience to the topic, state the phenomena, use a neutral voice. It actually says that. So I've taken the highlights, which are the language functions. And then what I do, and I use these words with my students, I tell them, I say, well, okay, class, we have to orient the audience to the topic. What does that mean? Okay, so basically what I'm going to ask you is, what are you explaining? So I kind of put it in plain language by asking them a question. And then I tell them grammatically, here's what you're going to do. Here's the language that you need to do it. So in order to orient me to your topic, you're going to give me a declarative statement. So scientific explanations are very strict. There is no we don't give an opinion. I don't want to know how you feel. Let's just talk about the content, right? What are you explaining? Oh, I'm explaining a food chain. Okay, great. So here's how you start. a food chain, right? So I even sound like a scientist. I sound official, right? And so I give them an example of how to start. I give them a sentence frame. And I always use this format. So I always have a highlight, I have a question, I tell them, okay, here's how you start, and then I give them an example. So what's really nice is if you teach middle school, Gina, you have a new anchor chart that you can use, and you just have to change the pink part. Okay. So you can use this for any kind of explanation. This is for science, but you could use it for social studies, right? So it really does kind of work that well. And then we move on. So that's okay. Make sure now, once you've oriented the audience, you're going to state the phenomena. So how does the sun power the earth, right? Or how does a food chain work, right? How does energy flow through a food chain? Okay, so each organism gets energy. So we're going to start it for them to give them that way in to the content. They need a way to actually express it. I remind them to maintain a neutral stance. What does that mean, a neutral stance? That means talk and sound like an expert. Use the vocabulary that you have to use. You know you have to use producer, consumer, decomposer, right? So I need to see that and hear that in your response. As you go through your explanation, you're going to add detail and precision. That means you have to tell me what happens at each step. So what does a producer do? Oh, so the producer receives the energy from the sun. Wow, look at you. You sound like an expert because you're giving me all that detail, right? By using transition words, we can help create that cohesion, help students get from one step or one part of the process to the next. And then I've added the last part where it says end with a sense of closure. It doesn't have that in the standards, but I feel that kids need that because otherwise they end up doing something like, oh, so that's all I know about this. And like, yeah. I'm like, oh, that was like a big, like, we could do better. So I like giving them that sense of here's how you end it. And here's what you can say. So what's great about this, again, it's a very usable structure. It's very explicit. You can use it as a checklist when you are scoring their responses. So it also shows very clearly what is expected in the genre of explanation. This is what an explanation looks and sounds like. And I do teach this to my students. So that I also find that when they have to do this in science class, I provide it also to the science teacher, and they're able to produce a better product because this is what's new to the science teacher is teaching the discourse structure of what an explanation looks and sounds like. Does that make sense? Again, feel free to use it, right? I don't own this. What I've basically done is taken what's in the framework and consolidated it. And I did one for each of the four key language uses. So I've done it for narrate and form, explain and argue. This is middle school. So if you teach a younger grade, there's actually less in your requirement. Like you could adapt this down. You would need to look at the framework to see what's the requirement for third grade scientific explanation. I don't need as much, right? And you could still use this example to show them, okay, so here's what I need you to do. Let's talk. We're going to state the phenomena. That's the big word, phenomena. Phenomena is like the wow part. We call it the wow part in my class. So, oh, wow, how does the sun get to the earth? It doesn't get in that car and drive here, right? No, it radiates heat, right? So that we have energy. It's transmitted through waves. Oh, wow, that's really cool. So they start to learn these things, right? And they can actually talk about it. So hopefully that's helpful to give you kind of that place to start. And then, like I said, within lessons, so if I'm teaching a scientific explanation or if I'm teaching narration, there are language bits and pieces, and this is just a sample of what's in the framework that we do need to teach our students directly. This is kind of your grammar mini lesson that you're going to include in your lesson plan. So you see some snippets here. The blue is kindergarten and the red is grade level cluster 4-5. So kindergartners have to be able to use the relational verbs like the verb to be and the verb to have. They have to be able to use nouns that show concepts. Okay, class, today we're going to do an investigation. What's that? Right? So investigation is a big word. It's a noun and it's a concept. It's a thing. We can't always see it, right? It gets a little tricky. They have to be able to construct a simple sentence in speaking and ultimately in writing by end of year. They have to use demonstrative pronouns, this, that, these, and those. They have to use adjectives. They need connectors like so and because. Those action verbs, they're pretty good at that with ing, right? And a concluding statement. So these are the expectations at the level of language. Grades 4-5, they have expanded noun groups, prepositional phrases, right? Dialogue verbs. So we get them away from using the word said. Let's use something else. right? Like shouted or whispered. Pronouns, so that their sentences don't always start the same way, right? Adding dependent clauses, that's also what helps them get to that complex sentence structure. A variety of verb tenses, there's connectors of time, right? Literary devices. So this is just a sample of what the language expectations are. And again, when you go to the framework and you go to your grade level cluster and you look at that key language use, it's going to be specific to the key language use. If you're in language for science, pardon me, and you're giving that explanation, you'll see passive language there because that's quite common in scientific language as well. Okay, I've done a lot of talking. So I want to just recognize that it's definitely a big undertaking, and I just want to kind of check in. Feel free to drop in the chat. What are you feeling overwhelmed by? I completely get it. I'm right there with you. Is there anyone who can be a friend to you? I'm hoping even that this chapter as well, because I know they're a very tight chapter and they have a great long history together, that they can also serve in that role as as folks you can lean on for guidance and support. Because we're often in the situation where we have no one else to talk to except each other. If you're the only ESL teacher and right, there really isn't anyone who quite understands what we do or has that knowledge of what it is we're trying to start here. And then also to challenge yourself and think about, okay, yes, I recognize I'm overwhelmed and I do have people who can support me. What is something that I would like to know more about, even if you choose one thing? I have to say, for me, the big takeaway were the anchor charts. When I made and created those anchor charts, it was a real wow moment for myself and for my students because I totally saw the difference in what they were able to produce. And it was just like, ooh, wow, really a game changer. They really got it's so hard to teach structure. And, these tasks on the access test are really specific. And I also saw that like the science teacher doesn't necessarily have the time or maybe that like experience or background to teach that discourse structure. So it's a great opportunity for both of us to work together. And when I did that last year, I created anchor charts for them that they could use and swap out that pink part so that once they have that, that becomes a tool that you can always use. And we'd print it, we'd have it on the table for kids when they had to do that. I asked her to separate the writing out from the test to really elevate it and to make it an important part that was also assessed, but assessed separately from a test where you have like constraints of time. So for me, that was the big area where I really wanted to push. If you're someone who wants to work on the lesson plans, like how do I pull this into a lesson plan or, the picks, I would start small. Like that's really my suggestion to you. Because I do recognize it's just a whole lot that's there, very overwhelming. And a lot of us, like I said, are kind of doing it on our own. Okay. I know I've done whole bit of talking. So if there's anybody who wants, anything you want to kind of share, Melissa, anything from the chat? I have just a few more slides, but I'm not sure I can see it from here, but
Gina just posted, feeling overwhelmed still with the content vocabulary, especially science and social studies. I can lean on learning from other ML teachers like you. I would like to know more about how we can make sure our content area teachers are assisting with these language needs so we as ML teachers can focus on our academic language.
yeah.
Yeah.
I again, for me, those anchor charts, Gina, were really like the game changer because it is something that the content teachers can relate to. They know they have scientific explanation or there's argument in social studies. And it really does benefit everyone when you provide something like an anchor chart. Kids actually know, and that they all say this to me. I'm like, what's the hardest part? Because I always ask them, and they always say, getting started. I'm like, yeah, because you don't know like what to say or like how to start it, and giving them those sentence frames. And again, you're not giving out the answer. You're just like, here's the structure. Let's follow this. Like, it helps
Yeah,
everybody
no.
produce, right?
Right, definitely. And I do it definitely within my own small group. I can't guarantee it's happening across all, they
So
have,
what if that was
maybe 7
something?
or 8 different, science teachers or whatnot. But I did like when you talked about sentence frames, we always focus more in the beginning. But this year I'm focusing on the end, like how to end your sentence because if I hear that one more time, right?
Yep.
Yep.
So making sure that they don't sort of ruin what they work so hard for by
Right.
just ending because
Strong
they,
finish. We want a
right,
strong
definitely a
finish.
strong finish. So
Yeah. And you know what, too, my other advice is if they write something like that, have them record it. So, I don't know if folks know about Vocaroo.
yeah, they're using that.
Awesome. So if somebody could drop that in the chat, Vocaroo, it's free. It is the easiest thing. It's a very easy, it's just a blank screen with a button that you press, it records. And when you're done, it gives you the link. You can copy and paste the link into anything, and you now have the actual recording. And it's just the straight up audio recording. There's no video. I don't need permission. Do you know what I mean? So it really makes it easy now that we don't have Flipgrid. Vocaroo is a great way to go. And I've had students use that this year. I will kind of share real quick a couple more things, and I'm going to show you that example, what I talked about with how the sun powers the earth. So just something, again, another tool for your toolbox if you are working towards pulling this together into curriculum rewriting, or even just to sketch an upcoming unit. Again, this is sort of a way to start to pull it together. Just a little kind of graphic organizer like this, where you can kind of sketch out, okay, so how can I take a unit I'm already teaching and basically, weedify it, right? I want to put it into the framework to make sure I have my content standards, my language standards. So I have my math, science, or social studies content standard. Now I have my ELD standard from the framework. Which KLU do I want to start with? If you're feeling overwhelmed, just pick one. Inform is probably the easiest way to go, right? Start with inform because there's so much informational text that kids read. Okay, so what are the expectations according to the grade level at like language arts, or it could even be under social instructional? What are the language functions? You're going to find these in the framework and the language features. So you have to go to the grade level cluster to see that. Okay, so it's a great tool to kind of help map it out. Here's an example of what a completed one could look like. This is for middle school social studies. So again, they have their standards here. The content is actually the Inca Empire. They gave the kind of essential question, but here's all their NJSLS and their WIDA standards. The KLU, they focused on explain. So of course we want both the interpretive as well as the expressive, right? So we want two forms. And what their expectations are. So when we look at the language expectations, they have to be able to interpret explanations, they have to construct explanations. And then once you look at those functions, I also suggest picking a couple of them. You don't need to pick them all. Start small, pick a few. Do we want to determine multiple? They chose multiple points of view for sources. That's such a big deal in social studies, things that support questions about phenomena. They want to analyze sources about for the contributing factors or causes, kind of like there's a lot of cause and effect in social studies. And also the strengths and the weaknesses of the explanation. That's really hard to get kids to do. Very appropriate for middle school as well. Here's where that passive voice comes in. So we see a lot of passive voice in science and social studies text at the middle school. Using those declarative statements, right? Adding dependent clauses to help students get to complex sentence structure. So these two are really linked. And again, you don't have to do them all. I would kind of pick those few, the ones that kind of give you the most bang for your buck, like connectors that help them connect one idea to the next. So it's just a sample of what a completed one could look like for you. There's another one that's high school about the use of social media. This is argument in language arts. A lot of us do language arts arguments about the advantages and disadvantages of social media, very current topic. So it's another one just to kind of show what it looks like. And this could be a great step for curriculum planning, right, in your own district. Again, you don't need to throw out what you have. You just need to weedify it. All right. You just need to put it through the framework to make sure these things are aligned. And again, this is another way to kind of show teachers we're already doing this. You just need to kind of align it, right? So that's kind of the piece that's missing. So here are some links to get to those documents. This is a link to that blank unit sketch. This is a link to a blank lesson plan. And again, there's those digital standards again. You have that already. That's definitely something you can use for now until your district gets that, but I would move this one forward because again, that needs to be in everybody's hands and not just in our hands. So again, just think about bringing this back, moving this forward. What is something that you can bring forward to your administration today? If that's something you want to drop into the chat. Think about some of those early slides, that first slide that I showed you that shows you here's all the changes, right? Puts it on one slide. It's all nice and neat. There's a link there. but something you can bring forward to your colleagues. Like I said, I've been going around to teams just showing them how to get the standards in there, right? And how can you learn more? Of course, our chapter meetings, and of course, the spring conference right around the corner. Register now. WIDA will be in the house like they always are. Dr. Lynn Schaefer Wilner, who is the lead author of the standards, will be there. So we're really fortunate to have her among us. She's also the one that created that digital standards lookup. So she's just so knowledgeable and she has so much to share, and she's very kind of open and accessible. So it's really nice to have that time with her as well. And the last thing I just want to share with you, I'm just going to stop sharing for a second so I can grab that example I was talking about. I was going to show you a scientific explanation. So I have some really nice examples just to share from students. I'm just going to open a couple. Here's just one right here. So let me just go back to where everybody is. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen once more. Okay, so this was actually a picture in our textbook, and that's actually all it was. And the students were talking about, we had to talk about, explain how does the sun power the earth. So there was a very short text. There was this picture. I added more text to it. We watched a video. We talked about this picture with our partner first. They had to explain it. We did some work on vocabulary. So they did have to do a word journal. We do these digital Freyer model journals. It's called a word journal. And they had to basically diagram these words: absorb, energy, heat, reflect, thermal, transmit. So they had to use those words. And then I also gave them transitional words. So this was the prompt, right? And it looks and kind of smells a lot like an access prompt, doesn't it? Right? That's my goal. So I wanted to create something that would be very similar to what they're going to have to do in the access. And here's the student's response. So how does the sun power the earth? And then I made them highlight, where did you use those transition words? And I want you to highlight, where did you use those vocabulary words? So it's that little accountability measure, right? So here's their response. The goal was to write 4 to 5 sentences. And you do see there's a little bit of, maybe not the most standard language, because we have a lot of gunnas and things like that. Not a whole lot of punctuation going on, but it's definitely, I think, an improvement because it really does show that sequence. It shows me where they're using vocabulary terms. You do get this kind of where things start in the beginning and also how it affects. I had them focus on the picture. I had them go from one number to the next. So the picture, ordering the picture also helps. And then you do have that little sense of, as a result, right? What we kind of get at the end. So I think it's a really great example, and add a little fun bit. I actually tried for the first time this paragraph, and I need to add a little disclaimer at the bottom. This paragraph was drafted with AI assist. So in Google Classroom, we are using Brisk as an opportunity for students to actually have a chat with an AI partner about how to start drafting their ideas. So we use Chat AI for drafting, and then the students actually had to go draft their response. So it may give them a kind of stronger response than they might typically produce independently or on a piece of paper, but it was also a way to kind of show, okay, does it help them direct to the task? Did I get a longer response? Did I get more specific development? So it was nice to do that. And what I learned through the process was that the AI actually ends up basically asking the kids a lot of questions like, can you tell me more about that? Can you tell me more? And they're like, it keeps asking me to tell more. I'm like, I love this AI chat bot. And it was my first time using it. I did have the kids sign a disclaimer for like but I had to keep telling them, you are talking to a robot. It is not a real person. It basically is like talking to yourself, because it feels like you're having a conversation, but they're just going to keep directing you back to you. Tell me more. What was your idea? That kind of thing. So in the end, they're like, oh, well, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I'm like, well, it is a robot. It's not a real person, right? I keep seeing that. But hey, I figure if you can't beat them, join them. And it was a really interesting experience. So I don't do it for all of them, but I thought, okay, let's just try it and see what we get as a result. So it was kind of a fun experiment on my part. So I
Oh.
want to thank everybody for listening to my rant and rave. And I think we have like 2 minutes for questions. And thank you so much for sharing a lot in the chat. I love that.
Well, thank you. That was so interesting. I love that last piece too. I love the highlighting to make them accountable. Actually, that's a great idea. Definitely really good. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in for the PDs. But yes, if anyone has any other questions, and Maggie, but really just makes it easy, the way you explain it and with the slides just makes it much more accessible. I don't feel quite so intimidated. So
Okay, so the slides are there in the chat. I know people were asking. The other thing I'm gonna do, Melissa, is I'm gonna send to you. So if you, do you have everybody's email you can send out to the group?
I do, yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna send to you, they're my anchor charts that I've made. But again, if you teach a lower grade level, you're gonna need to adapt down. Don't ask them to do all those things because that's grade 6 to 8. But it's a place to start and a way to kind of, like Gina said, offer that structure. So Gina, this is also what's gonna help, make that reach to those 7, 8 science teachers, and even maybe make that a goal and say, okay, I'm just gonna reach out to science first, right? And here is an example of what one could look like. Is there a way that we can come up with one for your next unit? And then if they have to give an explanation or talk about a model, that they could use that, students could use that as a tool when they're drafting. At the point of drafting is where they need that direct support. And you're not
Right.
there. You're not in a science class. So I always copied it. I put it in a plastic sleeve. I have a million of these plastic sleeves like everybody else does. And I would give it to the teacher and I said it goes on the table it stays there. I would tape it down. And the kids were like, oh, what's that? Oh, and everybody gets it. Like everybody, free access. Why not? And I'm like, and it's not giving out the answer. Right? They still have to construct the response. You're making explicit what the expectation is and what an explanation looks like,
And
right?
I think the more that they do that, it becomes more repetitious. It becomes like muscle memory. They get used to some of those transitional words. They're getting used to that vocabulary. How do you structure that explanation or whatever type of language it is you're working with? So yeah, that's great. Thank you. All right, I will definitely do that. The anchor charts I think are great. We do a lot of sentence frames. I know the teachers do that, but I think too, in terms of helping them focus on specific types of language that the kids could be using is important too. Because I think in elementary, the teachers aren't always, it's just kind of natural. They're not always really thinking about it or that focused on it.
Yeah.
So do the teachers in your school district, do they do any of the WIDA standards or not necessarily? Are they involved in that or how does that work there?
Pardon me. So I spent 2 years in science classes. So I can tell you for sure the science teachers are doing it. But that was the only group. And then my population exploded this year, and now I'm teaching back to just ESL all day. So I have offered to do additional training. The district is required to train everyone. That has not happened. I have offered to do this. I've been told there are no subs. Like, okay, it doesn't excuse any of this, right?
Right.
I have been showing people these standards are here. You do use, I'm telling them, you already are using standard 1. It's a little annoying to have to add another standard. Okay, but here it is. Click it, and now you've put it in your favorites, and so it's always going to be there, right? So
Yeah.
you just have to click it and drop it. Add it to your standard set in real time. It'll build a standard set for you that you can just copy and paste in. So I said everyone has standard 1 in every lesson. Doesn't matter if you teach gym. Doesn't matter if you teach ESL. You're giving directions the kids are hearing all day long. That's standard 1. And standard
Yes.
2, language arts, is where informational text lives. Everybody's
Mhm.
doing it. You're already doing it. So
Right.
that's always my first disclaimer. You are already doing this. So
Right.
it's a matter of you have to put these standards in. Let me show you how to do that. And this year I did, I would love to do a little bit more next year. I'm going to move on to the anchor charts if I can. I would like to just do that as a presentation. That enough. It has so much impact that I think it's worth it just to present only that.
I think teachers would really appreciate that because I think all the students will benefit from that. All of them
Exactly.
need that structure anyways. They really do.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they do. Maggie, you were great. That was
Thank you
really
so
so
much.
helpful.
Oh, it's so nice to come back home again.
I appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making that all understandable. That was great.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you
See
very
you at
much.
the conference.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Great. And you're presenting, yes?
Sure, like 10. I don't know. I don't know.
All right, good.
They get blood from me. I don't know.
Thank you. And thank
Okay.
anyone, whoever's still here, thank you for joining. The PD's linked here once or twice, and the slides are linked a couple times, and I'm happy to have the slides. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.